The road that led to Black Ridge Lake was the kind of road most people didn't notice. It wasn't marked on the main highway signs, and the turn-off was easy to miss if you were driving too fast. A narrow strip of cracked pavement curved away from the highway and slipped quietly into the trees, disappearing beneath a canopy of tall pines. At first glance, it looked like the entrance to an old logging road. And in a way, it was. The road wound deeper into the forest than you might expect, bending gently through hills and shallow valleys where fog often settled in the early morning. Moss clung to the shoulders of the pavement, and fallen needles softened the edges of the asphalt like a carpet that had grown there over decades. It was quiet out there. The kind of quiet that made you instinctively lower your voice even when you were alone. I hadn't planned to find Black Ridge Lake. I was driving north after a long week of work, following the vague idea that I needed to get away from the noise of the city for a while. No destination in particular. Just somewhere quiet. Somewhere with trees. The kind of place where the air smelled like pine and damp earth instead of traffic and concrete. When I saw the small wooden sign by the roadside, barely visible behind a patch of tall grass, I slowed the car almost without thinking. The sign was old and weathered. The paint had faded to a pale gray, and the letters were just barely readable. Black Ridge Lake. 3 miles. Something about it felt inviting. Or maybe it was the way the forest seemed to open slightly behind the sign, as if the road was gently pulling you inward. Either way, I turned the wheel. The tires rolled off the highway and onto the narrow road, and almost immediately the world felt different. The sound of passing cars vanished. The forest closed around me. Tall pine trees lined both sides of the road, their trunks rising like dark pillars into the fading afternoon sky. Sunlight filtered through the branches in soft, shifting patterns that moved slowly across the windshield as I drove. For a long while, there was nothing but trees. No houses. No power lines. Just forest. After a few miles, the road curved around a low ridge, and the trees opened suddenly. That's when I saw the lake. Black Ridge Lake sat in a shallow basin surrounded by forest on all sides. From the overlook where the road ended, the water stretched out wide and still, reflecting the pale colors of the evening sky like a sheet of dark glass. There was a small gravel parking area near the shoreline. 2 wooden docks extended into the water. And beyond that, nothing. No boats. No cabins. No people. Just the lake. I parked the car and stepped outside. The air felt cooler near the water, carrying the faint smell of damp leaves and algae. Somewhere in the trees behind me, a bird called once and then fell silent. The lake itself was perfectly still. No ripples. No wind. It was the kind of calm surface that made the reflection of the sky look almost real enough to step into. I walked down toward the dock. Each step crunched softly on the gravel, the sound seeming louder than it should have been in the quiet. At the edge of the water, the dock creaked faintly beneath my weight as I stepped onto the weathered boards. The wood was old but solid. Gray with age. I walked to the end and sat down, letting my legs dangle over the edge above the dark water. The sun was beginning to set behind the trees. Orange light stretched across the lake in long, glowing streaks. For a while, I just sat there. Listening. There's something different about the silence of a forest lake compared to other quiet places. It isn't empty. It's layered. Tiny sounds drift in and out of the stillness. The distant rustle of leaves. The soft plunk of something falling into the water far away. The faint whisper of wind moving through the upper branches of the pines. It's the kind of quiet that slowly settles into your bones if you stay long enough. By the time the sun slipped fully behind the trees, I had decided to camp there for the night. I kept a small tent and sleeping bag in the trunk of the car for trips like this. Within half an hour, I had the tent set up on a flat patch of ground near the parking area. The forest darkened quickly once the sun was gone. A cool blue twilight settled over the lake. And then the stars appeared. Without city lights, the sky above Black Ridge Lake was unbelievably clear. Thousands of tiny points of light scattered across the darkness like frost on glass. I sat near the shoreline with a small camp lantern beside me. The lake looked darker now. Almost black. It reflected the stars in faint, wavering patterns that shifted slowly with the slightest movement of the water. For a long time, nothing happened. Just the quiet. Just the forest. And then I heard the singing. At first, I thought it was the wind. A faint sound drifting across the lake. So soft that I almost ignored it. But the longer I listened, the more certain I became that it wasn't wind at all. It was a voice. A distant voice. Singing. The sound was incredibly faint, like a melody carried through thick fog. Slow. Gentle. Almost beautiful. I sat very still, listening carefully. The voice rose and fell in long, wavering notes. It didn't sound like any language I recognized. More like humming, stretched into something musical. For a moment, I wondered if there might be another camper somewhere on the far side of the lake. But the sound didn't seem to come from the shore. It came from the water itself. I stood slowly and walked closer to the edge of the lake. The singing continued. Soft. Haunting. The melody drifted across the surface of the water like a slow ripple. I scanned the shoreline. Nothing. No lights. No boats. Just the dark forest surrounding the lake on all sides. The voice continued for another minute or two. Then it stopped. Just like that. The silence returned. I waited. But the singing didn't come back. Eventually I convinced myself it had probably been someone far away on the other side of the lake. Sound can travel strangely over water at night. That was the most logical explanation. Still, as I climbed into the tent later that night, I found myself listening carefully to the quiet outside. Half expecting the singing to start again. But it didn't. At least, not that night. Part 2, The Lake Calls Back. The first night passed quietly. At least, that's what I told myself the next morning. When the pale grey light of dawn filtered through the trees, the lake looked completely ordinary again. Calm water. Gentle morning mist. Birds calling somewhere high in the branches. Whatever I had heard the night before felt distant now. Almost dreamlike. I stepped outside the tent and stretched, breathing in the cool forest air. The scent of pine needles and damp soil drifted through the clearing, carried by a faint breeze moving across the lake. The water looked different in daylight. Less mysterious. Less deep. The surface shimmered softly beneath the rising sun, reflecting pale gold light between slow-moving ribbons of fog. I walked down toward the shoreline with a mug of instant coffee warming my hands. The dock creaked under my weight as I stepped onto it again, just like the evening before. But the feeling was different now. The quiet of the morning felt lighter somehow. Birds flitted between the trees, their wings flickering in the sunlight. A pair of dragonflies skimmed across the surface of the water, leaving tiny ripples behind them. Everything seemed normal. And yet, as I stood there, looking out across the lake, I found myself wondering something strange. Where had the voice come from? The memory of it lingered in the back of my mind. That slow, haunting melody. The way it seemed to drift across the water. The way it had sounded, almost human. I scanned the opposite shoreline. From where I stood, the lake curved gently into the forest on both sides, the water disappearing between tall trees that leaned toward the shore. There were no cabins. No docks. No signs of anyone living nearby. Just forest. Miles of it. I took a sip of coffee and leaned slightly over the edge of the dock, peering down into the water. Near the shore, the lake was clear enough to see the rocky bottom beneath the surface. Smooth stones rested in pale clusters among drifting strands of lakeweed. But only a few feet farther out, the water darkened rapidly. The lake dropped away there. The bottom vanished into shadow. I straightened up slowly. Something about that sudden darkness made me uneasy. It wasn't unusual for lakes to deepen quickly near the shore. Still, I found myself staring at the water longer than I intended. Almost as if I expected something to move beneath it. But nothing did. After breakfast, I decided to explore the area a little. A narrow dirt trail ran along the edge of the forest near the lake, weaving between tall pines and thick patches of underbrush. It looked like an old hiking path, though it had clearly gone unused for quite some time. Fallen branches partially blocked sections of it, and moss had begun creeping across the packed earth. Still, it was easy enough to follow. The trail curved along the shoreline for nearly half a mile before climbing slightly up a low ridge. From the top, I could see most of the lake spread out below. The water looked darker from that height. A deep, still mirror surrounded by trees. For a moment, I thought I saw something strange near the center of the lake. A faint circular ripple. But by the time I focused on it, the water was calm again. Probably just a fish, I told myself. The forest was quiet as I walked back toward the campsite. Not silent exactly. Just subdued. Even the birds seemed less active deeper among the trees. When I reached the clearing again, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. There was an old wooden sign standing just beyond the edge of the parking area. It leaned slightly to one side, half hidden behind tall grass and a fallen branch. The wood had darkened with age, and the letters were carved rather than painted. Curious, I brushed away the grass covering the front. The sign read, "Blackridge Lake. No swimming. No boating. No fishing." I frowned slightly. That seemed unusual. Most lakes allowed at least fishing. But maybe this one was protected for environmental reasons. Or maybe the water was deeper than it looked. Still, the warning felt oddly specific. I stepped back and glanced toward the lake again. The surface looked perfectly calm. Inviting, even. The afternoon passed slowly. I spent most of the day reading beside the water, occasionally walking along the shoreline or skipping small stones across the lake. Each ripple faded quickly into the stillness. By the time evening arrived again, a thin layer of fog had begun forming over the water. The sunset was quieter than the night before. Thick clouds rolled in from the west, turning the sky into a dull sheet of gray and purple. The forest darkened earlier. I lit the lantern beside my tent as the last light faded. The lake beyond the trees looked darker tonight. Almost black. I told myself I wouldn't stay up waiting for the singing again. It had probably been someone across the lake. Or maybe a bird. Some birds make strange sounds at night. Still, as the hours passed, I found myself listening. The forest settled into its usual nighttime rhythm. Wind moving softly through the branches. Leaves rustling somewhere far off in the darkness. An owl calling once, then again. And then, just after midnight, I heard it again. The singing. This time, it was clearer. The sound drifted across the water in slow, haunting waves. Soft. Melancholic. Almost beautiful. I stood slowly. The lantern light flickered behind me as I walked toward the shore. The voice continued. Long, gentle notes rising and falling like a lullaby. But something about it felt different tonight. Closer. I stepped onto the dock. The boards creaked softly beneath my feet. The lake stretched out before me, dark and silent beneath the cloudy sky. The singing seemed to come from somewhere near the center of the water. I took a few steps closer to the edge. The melody shifted slightly. Almost as if the singer had noticed me listening. A strange chill ran down my spine. Then something happened that made my breath catch. The water moved. Not a ripple. Not the random splash of a fish. But a slow, widening circle forming near the center of the lake. The singing grew louder. And for the briefest moment, I thought I heard something inside the melody. A word. Soft. Barely formed. But unmistakable. My name. The sound drifted across the lake like a whisper carried on the wind. I stood frozen at the end of the dock. Listening. Waiting. The voice sang again. And this time, it sounded closer than ever. Somewhere beneath the water.
Do not go near the water after it's midnight. I need this to stay. The singing has stopped. But why does the silence feel so threatening?
Part 3, The Fisherman's Warning. The voice stopped as suddenly as it had begun. One moment the melody drifted across the lake like a slow ripple. The next, there was nothing. Just silence. The water returned to its usual stillness, the faint circle near the center fading until the surface looked perfectly calm again. I stood there for a long time. Listening. Waiting. But the singing didn't come back. Eventually the cold night air forced me to return to the tent. Sleep came slowly. Every small sound outside seemed louder than usual. Branches shifting in the wind. Leaves brushing together. The quiet creak of trees swaying somewhere deeper in the forest. At one point I thought I heard movement near the shoreline. But when I unzipped the tent and looked outside, the clearing was empty. The lake lay dark and silent beneath the cloudy sky. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still there. Watching. Waiting. Morning arrived with a dull grey sky. The clouds from the night before hadn't moved on. Instead they hung low over the forest, turning the light soft and colorless. The lake looked darker than usual under the heavy sky. Almost metallic. I packed away my sleeping bag and stepped outside. The forest felt quieter today. Not silent. Just restrained. As if the woods were holding their breath. I walked down toward the shoreline again, half expecting to see something different about the water. But the lake looked exactly the same. Calm. Still. Empty. For a while I considered leaving. The trip had already been longer than I planned, and there were plenty of other places farther north where I could camp. But curiosity kept pulling me back. The memory of the voice. The strange way the water had moved. And that single moment when the melody had almost spoken my name. None of it made sense. Which was exactly why I wanted to stay. After a quick breakfast, I decided to drive into the nearest town for supplies. The road that led away from the lake wound through the forest for nearly 20 minutes before finally reconnecting with the highway. A few miles farther north, I found a small roadside town called Grey Hollow. It was the kind of place that looked unchanged for decades. A gas station. A diner. A general store with faded signs hanging in the windows. I parked beside the store and stepped inside. A small bell above the door jingled softly. The interior smelled faintly of coffee and old wood. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with camping supplies, canned food, and fishing gear. Behind the counter sat an older man reading a newspaper. He looked up as I entered. "Morning," he said. His voice was calm but slightly rough, like someone who had spent most of his life outdoors. "Morning," I replied. I grabbed a few things from the shelves, water, snacks, and a fresh battery pack for the lantern. As I brought the items to the counter, the man folded his newspaper and studied me for a moment. "You camping nearby?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "Up at Black Ridge Lake." The reaction was subtle. But I noticed it. The man's expression shifted slightly. Not surprise exactly. More like quiet concern. "You alone up there?" he asked. I nodded. "Just for a couple days." He leaned back slightly in his chair, considering something. Then he asked another question. "You hear anything strange last night?" The question caught me off guard. "Strange how?" The man hesitated for a moment before answering. "Sometimes folks say they hear things out there," he said slowly. "Sound travels funny across that water." I thought about the singing. For a second, I considered brushing it off. But something about the way he asked the question made me answer honestly. "I heard someone singing," I said. "Late at night." The man's eyes narrowed slightly. Sounded like it was coming from the lake. The store grew very quiet. Even the humming refrigerator behind the counter seemed louder than before. The man didn't speak for a few seconds. Then he sighed. I was wondering when someone would mention that again. A faint chill crept across my shoulders. You've heard it too? I asked. He shook his head slowly. Not me. But others have. He stood up from the chair and walked over to the window, looking out toward the highway. The lake's been strange for a long time, he said. Longer than anyone around here can remember. I waited. He turned back toward me. Used to be people fished there, he continued. Back before those warning signs went up. What changed? I asked. The man rested his hands on the counter. For a while, he said, people started disappearing. The word settled heavily in the air. Disappearing. I repeated. He nodded. Mostly fishermen. Couple swimmers too. No bodies ever found. Just gone. A cold feeling spread slowly through my chest. What does that have to do with the singing? I asked. The man studied me carefully before answering. Some of the people who heard it, he said quietly, were the last ones seen at the lake. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Outside, a truck passed slowly along the highway. The sound faded quickly. You're not the first camper to hear it, he added. But you'd be smart not to listen too closely. What do you mean? The man glanced toward the door as if making sure no one else had entered. Then he leaned slightly closer. Most folks say the voice starts out far away, he said. Soft. Hard to understand. But the longer you stay, the closer it gets. A faint knot tightened in my stomach. And eventually? I asked. The man hesitated. His eyes drifted toward the window again. Eventually, he said quietly, the lake starts singing back to you. I felt a chill run down my spine. What happens then? The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked slowly back to his chair behind the counter. He picked up the newspaper again, though he didn't open it. Tell you what, he said. If you're still planning on camping there tonight. He paused. Then looked directly at me. Don't go near the water after midnight. Why? The man's voice dropped slightly. Because that's when the voice starts calling. The silence in the store seemed heavier now. Calling who? I asked. He held my gaze for a moment. Then said quietly, whoever's listening. Part 4, the song gets closer. The drive back to Black Ridge Lake felt longer than it had that morning. Grey Hollow disappeared behind me as the narrow road curved back into the forest. The sky remained heavy with clouds, turning the afternoon light dim and colorless. Tall pine trees lined the road like silent walls. Their branches swayed slowly in the wind, whispering against one another high above the pavement. I kept thinking about the old man in the store. About the way his voice had lowered when he talked about the lake. About the disappearances. And most of all, about what he had said just before I left. The lake starts singing back to you. The words echoed in my mind as the car rolled deeper into the woods. Eventually the small wooden sign appeared again beside the road. Black Ridge Lake, 3 miles. The letters looked darker now. More worn than I remembered. I turned onto the narrow road and continued through the trees. The forest seemed quieter today. The usual sounds of birds and insects felt distant, almost muted. When the lake finally came into view again, a thin sheet of fog covered the surface. The water looked darker than before. Still. Waiting. I parked the car in the gravel lot and stepped out. The air felt colder. Even though the afternoon wasn't particularly late. Something about the lake seemed different. Not visibly. But in the way the place felt. Like a room where someone had just been standing moments before you entered. I walked slowly toward the dock. The fog shifted gently across the water. For a moment I thought I saw movement beneath the surface near the shore. But when I leaned closer, the water was clear again. Just stones. Just weeds. Nothing else. I shook off the feeling and returned to the campsite. The rest of the afternoon passed quietly. I tried to read. Tried to relax. But my attention kept drifting back toward the lake. Every so often I would glance up from the book and stare across the water. Listening. Expecting something. But nothing happened. By early evening the clouds began to thin. The setting sun broke through the trees in long orange beams. The fog lifted slowly off the lake. And for a while, everything looked peaceful again. Almost normal. Dinner was simple. A small camp stove. Canned soup. The quiet sounds of the forest returning as the daylight faded. Crickets started chirping among the trees. Wind rustled softly through the branches. And the lake. The lake remained perfectly still. But as night settled over the forest, the calm feeling began to fade. I couldn't stop thinking about midnight. About the warning. Don't go near the water after midnight. I checked my watch. 10:47 p.m. The lantern flickered beside the tent. The forest had grown darker now. The moon was hidden somewhere behind the clouds. And the lake beyond the trees looked like a black mirror. I told myself I wouldn't go down to the dock tonight. If the voice started again, I would stay where I was. Just listen from the campsite. Nothing more. 11:38 p.m. The wind had died down. The forest was almost completely silent. Even the insects seemed quieter. I sat beside the lantern staring toward the lake. Waiting. 11:57 p.m. Something changed. It was subtle. Almost impossible to describe. But the air itself seemed heavier somehow. Like the moment just before a storm. I stood slowly. 3 minutes until midnight. I could hear my own breathing now. The quiet around the lake had become absolute. No wind. No insects. Nothing. Then, midnight arrived. And the singing began. The voice drifted across the water just like before. Soft. Melancholic. Beautiful in a strange, haunting way. But this time it was unmistakably closer. The sound carried clearly through the trees. Like someone standing somewhere out on the lake. Singing slowly into the darkness. I stayed where I was. Just like I promised myself. But the melody continued. Gentle notes rising and falling. The strange language flowing like water. And the longer I listened, the harder it became to ignore. The voice felt almost magnetic. Pulling gently at my attention. Calling. Not loudly. Not urgently. Just patiently. I realized I had started walking without meaning to. My feet carried me slowly through the trees. Toward the lake. The dock appeared ahead through the branches. Moonlight had finally broken through the clouds. The water glowed faintly beneath the pale light. And the singing? The singing was louder now. Clearer. Coming from somewhere just beyond the dock. I stopped at the edge of the trees. My heart pounded quietly in my chest. The old man's warning echoed in my mind again. Don't go near the water after midnight. But the melody drifted across the lake like a whisper. Gentle. Inviting. I took one step forward. Then another. The boards of the dock creaked softly beneath my weight. The voice grew louder. Closer. And then? Something moved in the water. A slow ripple spread outward from the darkness just beyond the end of the dock. The singing stopped. The lake became silent again. But the ripple continued. Expanding slowly across the surface. I leaned forward slightly. Trying to see into the water. And that's when the voice returned. Not singing this time. Whispering. A single word. My name. From somewhere beneath the lake. Part 5, Something moves beneath the water. My name echoed softly across the lake. Not loudly. Not like a shout. More like a whisper carried upward through deep water. I froze at the end of the dock. The sound had come from below. From somewhere beneath the lake. For a moment I told myself I must have imagined it. The human mind is good at turning random sounds into familiar shapes. Especially when you're already tense. But the silence that followed made the moment feel even more real. The ripple near the end of the dock continued spreading outward. Slow circles widening across the black surface of the lake. Then the water went still again. The moonlight reflected perfectly across the surface. Like polished glass. I leaned forward carefully, gripping the edge of the dock with both hands. The boards creaked quietly beneath my weight. Below me, the water looked darker than before. Deeper somehow. The faint glow of the moon revealed almost nothing beneath the surface. Just darkness. But the longer I stared, the more the darkness seemed to shift. Not dramatically. Just subtly. Like shadows moving very far below. A faint current brushed against the dock. I pulled back slightly. The voice didn't speak again. But the lake didn't feel quiet anymore. There was a presence in the water now. Not visible. But unmistakable. Something was moving beneath the surface. Slowly. Patiently. Watching. A soft ripple formed again near the end of the dock. This time closer than before. The water bulged upward slightly. As if something large had passed underneath. My heart began beating faster. The old man's warning echoed again in my mind. Don't go near the water after midnight. Too late for that now. I stepped backward slowly along the dock. The ripple followed. The movement beneath the water stayed close to the surface. Tracking my position. The boards creaked under my feet. Behind me, the dark forest waited in silence. I took another step. The water shifted again. Closer. Something brushed the underside of the dock. The wood trembled slightly. Not violently. Just enough to make my stomach tighten. I stopped moving. The lake became still again. For several seconds nothing happened. Then the singing began once more. But it sounded different now. No longer distant. No longer drifting across the water. The voice was directly beneath me. The sound vibrated through the wood of the dock itself. A slow, haunting melody rising from the depths below. The notes were clearer now. Stronger. And beneath the melody I could hear something else. A second sound. Movement. Water sliding against something massive below. My breathing slowed without me realizing it. The voice was hypnotic. Each note seemed to sink deeper into my mind. The melody stretched and curved like something alive. And then? The water beside the dock began to glow faintly. At first I thought it was just the reflection of the moon. But the light moved independently. A pale shape rising slowly from the darkness below. I leaned forward again before I could stop myself. The glow grew brighter. Something large was moving upward beneath the surface. A shadow forming beneath the thin layer of moonlit water. For a moment I thought it might be a large fish. Or maybe a drifting log. But as the shape rose closer, it became clear that it was neither. The outline was wrong. Too long. Too smooth. The water distorted the shape slightly, but one thing was certain. Whatever was beneath the lake, it was enormous. The singing stopped suddenly. The glowing shape paused just below the surface. Only a few feet beneath the dock now. The water trembled softly around it. I held my breath. And slowly, the surface began to break. Not violently. Not like something lunging upward. But gently. Like something curious rising to look. The moonlight reflected across the water as it parted. A pale shape moved beneath the surface. Then the whisper returned. My name again. This time clearer. Closer. Right beneath the dock. I stumbled backward instinctively. The boards creaked loudly as I moved. The pale glow below the water shifted with me. Following. Tracking. The singing resumed again. But the melody had changed. It sounded excited now. Almost eager. Like the lake itself was waking up. And then something brushed the edge of the dock. Not the underside. The side. Something smooth sliding against the wood. The dock rocked slightly beneath my feet. And in that moment I realized something that made my blood run cold. Whatever was beneath the lake. It wasn't just moving. It was circling. Part 6, The Voice Knows Your Name. The lake continued to circle beneath the dock. I could feel it now. The slow movement in the water. The way the dock shifted slightly every few seconds as something passed beneath it again and again. The singing continued. Soft. Mesmerizing. The melody seemed to come from everywhere at once now. Not just beneath the dock. But through the water. Through the wood beneath my feet. Through the quiet night air itself. And beneath the melody. The whisper returned. My name. Slowly spoken. Drawn out across the surface of the lake. I stepped backward along the dock. Carefully this time. The boards creaked quietly beneath my weight. The water followed. The pale glow beneath the surface moved with me. Circling closer. Tracking every step. The whisper came again. Closer than before. Not angry. Not threatening. Just patient. Like someone waiting for an answer. I turned and hurried toward the shore. The dock rocked slightly as I moved faster. Behind me, the water stirred more violently now. Ripples spread across the lake in widening circles. The singing grew louder. The melody rising with strange excitement. I stepped onto the shore and turned around. The lake had changed. The calm surface was gone. Dark waves rolled slowly across the water. The pale glow beneath the surface moved rapidly now. Just beneath the moonlight. Circling the dock again. Then moving toward the shoreline. Toward me. I backed away from the water. My heart pounded hard against my ribs. The whisper came again. My name. But this time. It sounded different. Familiar. Uncomfortably familiar. The voice didn't sound like a stranger anymore. It sounded like someone I had known. Someone from long ago. The realization made my stomach twist. The voice beneath the lake was changing. Shaping itself. Becoming something recognizable. The glow beneath the surface stopped a few feet from the shore. The water trembled softly. The singing faded again. The lake fell silent. For a long moment nothing happened. Then the whisper came again. Not my name this time. A question. Soft. Gentle. Do you remember me? The words drifted across the water like fog. My mind raced. The voice sounded like someone I almost recognized. But I couldn't place it. Not completely. Not yet. The water stirred again. The glow brightened beneath the surface. The shape below the lake rose slowly upward. Closer than before. Just beneath the thin layer of moonlit water. The surface rippled gently. And for the briefest moment, I saw a face. Not clearly. Just the faint outline of something pale beneath the water. Eyes. A mouth moving slowly. Whispering again. My name. The memory hit me suddenly. Years ago. A childhood summer. A lake not so different from this one. A day when someone had gone into the water. And never come back. The voice beneath the lake spoke again. Soft. Patient. You left me here. The words echoed across the quiet water. My chest tightened. I backed away from the shore. But the water followed. Ripples spreading toward the land. The glow beneath the surface stretching forward. The voice became louder now. More eager. The whisper repeated again and again. Come closer. Come into the water. Come back. The singing returned. Louder than ever before. The melody filling the forest around the lake. The trees themselves seemed to hum with it. For a moment I felt the pull again. That strange hypnotic calm. The urge to step forward. To walk into the lake. To follow the voice down into the quiet darkness beneath the water. But I stopped myself. I turned away from the shore. And ran. Branches snapped beneath my feet as I rushed through the trees toward the campsite. The singing rose behind me. The voice calling louder now. My name echoing through the forest. I reached the car and pulled the door open. The moment I slammed it shut, the singing stopped. The silence that followed felt heavier than the sound itself. I started the engine. The headlights cut through the dark forest road. For a moment I hesitated. Looking back through the trees. The lake was barely visible now. Just a faint stretch of darkness beneath the moonlight. But something moved at the shoreline. The pale glow again. Right at the edge of the water. Watching. Waiting. The whisper drifted faintly across the trees one last time. My name. Soft. Patient. As if the voice knew something I didn't. I drove away quickly. The forest swallowed the road behind me. Within minutes the lake was gone from view. But even now, long after that night, sometimes when the world grows quiet, when the wind dies down and the air becomes still, I swear I can hear something. A distant melody. Soft singing carried on the night air. And every now and then, just beneath the sound, a whisper. Calling my name from somewhere far away. From somewhere deep beneath the water. Waiting for me to come back.